Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us today for the second session of our two-webinar series on climate finance for resilience in the Arab States region. These sessions are conducted jointly by the Clean Energy Business Council through its Climate Finance Working Group and the UNDP Regional Hub in Amman through its regional project SDG Climate Facility, Climate Action for Human Security. My name is Mihaela Nina, and I'm a partner at Augmentation X, and I will have the pleasure to moderate today's session. Just as a brief overview, the aim of our discussions is to catalyze partnerships among economy actors and facilitate private investments to address the climate SDG nexus in the region, with special attention to the countries in fragile contexts. The wealth of knowledge of our distinguished speakers will be contributed to the discussion paper, which has been shared with each single participant. This will be further developed into a white paper and made publicly available within a month. Now, for our attendees that couldn't make it to the first webinar, our discussions revolved around the climate finance landscape in the region, challenges and opportunities, as well as the key considerations for a green recovery. We had insights highlighting the socioeconomic impacts of climate change and the need for a consolidated intervention from all economy actors, governments and private sector alike. Following this, today we are going to focus our 90-minute conversation into two parts. The first one on regional case studies and practical insights drawn from success stories in the region. And the second part will be a panel discussion centered around the various financial instruments which we require to stimulate an uptick in climate capital deployed across the region. Before starting, I would also like to encourage everyone's participation by sharing questions, perspectives through the chat box, as well as take part in our polls throughout today's session. And a note that we will try and cover as much as possible throughout the discussions. However, if any question remains unanswered, the team at CEBC will connect with you after the webinar. So with this being said, please allow me to introduce you to our first guest speaker today, who will set the tone for today's conversations, Mr. Khaled Abdel Shafi, who is serving as the Director of UNDP's Regional Hub for the Arab States in Amman, as well as Deputy Director of the Regional Bureau for Arab States. Mr. Abdel Shafi, a pleasure to welcome you. Mr. Abdel Shafi, we can't hear you. I think that the microphone might be on mute.
Could be internet connection, I think.
Apologies for the inconvenience. We are waiting for Mr. Abdel Shafi to get back on the panel.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Can you see me also? Yes.
No.
Okay.
Yes, no.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mihaela. I didn't hear the full introduction yet that you made. We have electricity cuts here. I'm actually speaking to you from Beirut, from Lebanon, where I've been here for the past 3 weeks, helping with the response of the UN to the latest catastrophe that have hit Beirut. As you know, the big blast with its very severe consequences on the people, on the livelihoods, on the infrastructure, And I think this is a good introduction to our meeting because, as you know, a lot has been devastated in Lebanon in terms of infrastructure, schools, clinics, livelihoods have been shattered of the people, and now in the process of developing a response framework and a recovery framework from this disaster, we are looking at issues related to our topic today, which is how to build back better, how to build back greener, and how to use this as an opportunity for Lebanon and for the Lebanese people to build back better. Of course, as we all know, an overarching principle in the 2030 agenda is the whole issue of leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind in the sense of leaving no country behind, no community, no group. We are at UNDP very much concerned about the vulnerable groups in the different countries and the impact of such crisis. And in our Arab world, unfortunately, we have lots of crisis situations. Many countries are going through crisis or are affected by the spillover of crisis in neighboring countries. We are hosting around 60% of the refugees and the IDPs in the world, and that's why this has to be taken into consideration when we are looking at issues related to climate change and environment and energy and so on. So one of the principles, as I said, is how to build back better and greener for the population. Of course, solar and renewable energy, if we want to talk about them, are not about simply generating electricity, but as we have talked about in the first webinar, it's also about how this will affect human security, SDGs and their achievement. In our first webinar on Monday, we heard about the importance of policy, governance, and regulations to attract finance at scale. On the other hand, we also heard about a certain disconnect that exists still today, where over 90% of the financial flows is going into developed markets. And this does not paint a very positive picture for developing countries so far, especially fragile and conflict-affected countries. Now that we know of the needs for finance, and we know of the role of the government and the private actors in mobilizing this finance, the next step will be to discuss today in more detail the different instruments that the finance world has at their disposal and how these finance instruments can help catalyze the systematic level of transformation that we need to achieve, that we need in order to achieve the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And in this regard, it would be very important to identify the value added that actors such as UNDP and others can bring to facilitate those efforts. I'm glad that the two panels that are planned for today are going to deal with this critical topic. And we have with us a number of distinguished thought leaders and experts around this virtual table. Without taking much of your time, because I'm sure you didn't come here to listen to me, but you came to listen to the experts and the thought leaders, I would like finally to thank our partners in the Clean Energy Council, Business Council, for partnering with us in this very important webinar. Wishing you all the success in your deliberations, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Abdel Shafi, for sharing your insights and perspectives, as well as the broader overview on the session that has taken place on the 31st of August and what's going to take place today as well. We will now have the pleasure of welcoming Ahmed Samir El-Berbali, who is the Interim Managing Director of the MENA Clean Energy Business Council, for his opening remarks as well. So, Ahmed, handing it over to you.
Thanks so much, Mahel, and thanks, Mr. Khalid, for the great introduction. It's definitely our pleasure to be collaborating with the UNDP Regional Hub in Amman on this series of webinars on climate finance. So I want to first apologize on behalf of Dr. Nasser Saidi, our chairman. He got an urgent meeting that he couldn't make it to give the opening remarks. So I'll be giving a very short presentation about CEBC very quickly, just for those who don't know who the Clean Energy Business Council is. So we are not-for-profit membership organization that represents the private sector involved in the clean energy sector in the MENA region. We try to establish a dialogue between the private and the government sectors to drive the development of the really much needed regulations and policies to support that sector in the MENA region. We are based actually out of the UAE, but we operate and cover the whole MENA, Middle East and North Africa region. Our mission is to work on behalf of our members to promote renewable energy and clean energy technologies. We build partnerships with the public and private sector regionally and internationally as well. As CEBC, we always develop and present policy solutions on the specific topics that we work on. What we do, the kind of activities that we do throughout the year as advocacy and thought leadership through the different platforms, such as the one we are speaking at right now. We publish reports, white papers, policy papers, and different case studies to feature and promote the work of our members. We also organize different events, conferences, that's before COVID, but now everything is webinars. But hopefully we'll go back to physical events very soon and meet you all very soon. We build partnerships, as I mentioned, with local, regional, and international organizations. We have some of them already part of this webinar. We have a very diverse and very large portfolio of members, including, you can see here, e-mobility companies, energy efficiency, some consultancies, banks, investment firms. We also have some really very interesting portfolio of members, partners that we are proud to be collaborating with. You can see here most of them on this screen. We are happy to be collaborating again with the UNDP on this and on the white paper that will be circulated very soon after this webinar series. We are working right now on 3 different working groups. Sustainable or climate finance as the first one. We have another working group on energy efficiency, focusing both on building, retrofitting, and also industrial energy efficiency. Future Mobility Club is the third one, focusing currently mainly in e-mobility in the GCC. Hopefully we'll expand the scope within the coming, by 2021 to the MENA region and overall. We have 2 programs. First program is Women in Clean Energy, where we try to promote clean energy for the young women and also encourage them to get into the sector. We launched recently a mentorship program for women and young professionals. We have the second program, which is the schools, trying to raise awareness for the school students to get into the sector as well. This is more about our climate finance working group. The slides will be shared later on if you want to have a closer look on this. We have very diverse members in our climate finance working groups. You are all invited to be part of this. If interested to be a member and know more about this, just make sure to reach out to me after this webinar. Why would we become a member? Again, the slides will be shared with you, but because of the limited time, I'll skip that slide as well. And this is my contact details. If you don't have it already, please reach out to me to know more about the Clean Energy Business Council and our activities related to climate finance. We'd be happy to have you as members of the CEBC. So with that, I just hand it over back to Mihaela to introduce the first panel. Thanks again for joining us today, and looking forward to a very interesting discussions for our esteemed speakers during the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. And nonetheless, I would also like to personally encourage our attendees to learn more about the Clean Energy Business Council and the Climate Finance Working Group, as well as UNDP's SDG Climate Facility Project by getting in touch with either yourself or with Sujala. And I'm sure that the details are going to be shared further with our attendees. Now, in line with some of the areas highlighted in the opening remarks, as well as in our previous session, and we've very well understood that we need to see the other economy actors rising to the challenge in order to enable transformative change in the renewables deployment, I would like to involve our participants in a first poll. So if we can please start the poll. Perfect. Now that everyone can see it, if you could please let us know your perspectives on who should we further engage to enhance the effectiveness of climate mitigation efforts. And while everyone is taking the time to participate to this poll, I would also like to take you through our agenda over the coming 40 minutes, as we will delve further in the renewable energy financing landscape, as well as 2 regional case studies, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. Our first guest speaker, whom also will be leading our Q&A session, is Dr. Majed Mahmoud, the Acting Executive Director and Technical Director of the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Following Dr. Mahmoud's presentation, we will also be joined by Rajiv Mahajan, the Head of Project Finance in the Private Sector Facility of the Green Climate Fund. Rajiv will be sharing more about the High Impact Program for the corporate sector, which was recently launched by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And afterwards, our second case study will focus on Egypt's Benban Solar Park and will be covered by Dr. Ihab Ismail Amin, who is serving as Vice Chairman for Technical Affairs at the New and Renewable Energy Authority. Dr. Ihab will be highlighting the key factors that have led to the successful implementation of this large solar project. So with this in mind, I would like to thank everyone for participating to the poll, and if we could quickly share the results on the screen. Perfect. So now we can see the results, and what I would like to do is handing it over to Dr. Majed, maybe starting off with your initial reaction on the poll results and then delving into the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you today, in fact, and ladies and gentlemen, it is in fact interesting to see that how you value the public-private partnerships. In fact, public-private partnerships are taking the highest share in the poll we have seen, and in fact, this is one of the cornerstones of the deployment of renewable energy, and in fact, this is also one of the key targets for financial instruments to enable the support programs for deploying renewable energies. Today, I'll be honored to talk to you on the landscape of renewable energy finance in the Arab region, and also I'd be honored to moderate the session with my 2 fellow panelists, Dr. Rajiv and Dr. Ihab Ismail. Both will give us 2 very interesting case studies that we will be happy to in fact learn from. If you allow me, I would now start with the presentation on the landscape for renewable energy in the region. If you please put that presentation on the screen. Okay, tell the presentation. Okay, the presentation is now on. Next slide, please. Next slide. We will talk in brief about some introductory remarks on the financial instruments themselves, the definition, and so on. And then we'll talk about the operational capacities in the Arab region till the end of 2018. And then some progress highlights showing the countries, the targets in these countries, the policies adopted, and also some issues related to finance and investments. Next, please. Well, when we speak about financial instruments, we are speaking about a variety of instruments, from grants to concessional debts to equity, to pure commercial debts, and also supported by some instruments for guarantees, insurances, asset-backed securities, also some result-based financing, similar to ESCO's program, carbon financing, small-scale projects, and so on. And we can distinguish two main issue there. The first is that the instrument we look we look into the level of risk that is assumed by the entity providing the instrument concerned, and the second is the level of leverage, and here how much money or cash investments that we are mobilizing through these instruments. So if we are putting, for example, $1 million, are we expecting to leverage 10 million because of this from the private sector, 4 million, and so on. And we can see that this variety of instruments have different levels of risks and also of leveraging effect. Next, please. And when we speak about risk, there are typically 8 sets of risks: financial, market, those related to resources and the sites themselves, geopolitical, of course, business viability, environmental, also those related to the commissioning of the project, building and testing, operational, and so on. And we are looking for the financial instrument to target 2 issues. The first is addressing the financial barriers, for example, if it is underdeveloped market, and the second is to address the risks that we highlighted earlier. So, and also, of course, we can have a merge of both together in the same time. Nevertheless, we need to keep in mind that RE-based electricity, for example, and other services are highly sensitive to the financing terms. Next, please. So we need enabling frameworks that, in fact, allow different financial instruments to work. And this include legal framework, regulatory framework, tariff framework, contractual framework, and several supplementary frameworks like resource assessment, like technology transfer, land availability, and so on. Next, please. So when we speak, for example, about the policies for renewable energy, we have main policies and supporting policies. And for the main policies, we have those based on quantitative policies, like competitive bids, where we have specific sizes of the project, megawatt installed. For example, we look into competitive bids, we look into auctions, quotas, green certificates, or we have pricing policies like feed-in tariff, net metering, premiums, and so on. And also of equal importance to have supporting policies in place. And these are financial, like availing concessional loans, having public purchases, also fiscal incentives like taxes and customs, having templates for contracts, and so on. These are all elements that are adapted all over the region for supporting deployment of renewable energy. Next, please. So we need to think about how to make the business conducive as much as possible. The environment, conducive to business as much as possible. And we look into several factors that you can see here: the market size and the profitability, the transparency and development of the legal and regulatory framework, as we referred earlier, the developed infrastructure, the stability of the local currency, the political and economic stability, the ease of doing business, also the allowance for partnerships and the strength of the partners in the country, the overall macro level investment risks, if there are treaties between the countries that would allow easier flow of investment, the maturity of the capital market there and the financial market in general, the environmental consideration, of course, and also from the investors' perspective, they are looking into issues like the exit strategy in case they would like to, in fact, sell their project to other private investors and so on. But there are several key issues that are now existing in the Arab region. And first of all, there is a political commitment all over the region to adopt renewable energies. And second is also investor confidence in many markets, in the many national markets. I mean, we can see that in, for example, in Jordan, to a certain extent, in Emirates, in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Algeria, and so on. So this is an important issue, and also the engagement and partnership of utility and state-backed private companies in terms of providing equity to the project and availing international soft concessional loans. And also we, together with this, the issue of the market size, having a clear set of bankable projects, contractual documents ready, administrative and licensing processes are really clear in many countries. The standard PPAs are there that is acceptable and bankable. Project support, for example, in grid connection, zoning and allocation of land, incentives, concessional finance, as we highlighted, securities, credit support through the government to the off-taker. All these elements are really essential and for a compelling RE business in the Arab region. Next, please. So, but we need to think about the linkages. The linkages between production, transmission, distribution, and collection of the tariff. And here, when we speak about transmission, this is a bottleneck in many countries because the infrastructure is not always ready to adopt renewable technologies, and also the readiness of the transmission system to allow for the concept of prosumers, having producer and consumers at the same time, the bidirectional flow of electricity rather than one directional as a typical system, old systems. And then the financial capacity of the taker or the consumer to pay for the tariff, and this is really important, the collection rate. And we have seen in many cases, in many countries that are currently in instabilities, in some sort of aftermath of the wars and so on, we have seen that the collection rates are really low, and this would somehow make the investor hesitated to get into the market. Next, please. So when we look into the linkages, also we need to think about somehow the other issues, that it's not only the project, it's not only the system to install, whether it's for provision of electricity or for other services in the water sector, for example, in the health or educational sectors, industrial sectors, but we need to look into also the issues related, for example, to the integration with the current systems. If we have higher shares of renewable, this will pose some problems that the country should be ready to tackle. The reliability issue, the issue of balancing energy, storage, which is really important. We are seeing different types of storage systems now emerging in the region, whether electricity or hydro-based. Also the future, the power to X solutions, e-mobility, hydrogen, and so on. We need to think about all this, and we need to boost these different solutions. So there is also financial needs for that, and financial instruments are needed in these issues. Next, please. So I'd like to quote Churchill here, that those who are failing to plan are planning to fail, and we need to plan carefully for the future. And if we look into the Arab region, please, next, please. We can see that we have around 7 gigawatts of new renewables now, representing around 6% of the installed capacities. This is one thing that is really important to note. And if we look into the overall, including hydro, we'll find around 18 gigawatts of installed capacities. Next, please. When we look into the investments that are injected into the market through new renewables, excluding hydro, we found around, over the past 10 years, we have around $15 billion invested. And this is in all Arab countries for getting this target. If we look back into up to 2008, we had only $1.2 billion in few projects, but now we have more than, and we expect more in the near future, in fact. Next, please. And if we look into the growth in the renewable energy capacities, excluding hydro, you'll find exponential growth in non-hydro capacities. Next, please. And one of the important trends that we are seeing in the region, that investments are in fact given to 10 years ago, it was only to 3/4 of the investment and the installed capacities were wind-based, and now more than 55% of the total capacities are solar-based, whether PV or CEBC. And if we look into the next slide, please, we'll see that in fact the majority of the projects that are installed in the region are photovoltaic projects. 3 gigawatts of renewables are now through PV systems, while CEBC technology is in fact getting some attention, but not as much as PV. Next, please. Also from the, I would say from the installed capacity perspective, we can see the top countries are Egypt and Morocco, followed by, if we exclude hydro, followed by Jordan, Emirates, Algeria, and Tunisia. And if we include hydro, we will find some of the countries that are typically are suffering from are fragile, I'd say, and they have transitional situation like Iraq and Sudan and Syria. So this is interesting to see how the two shares. But if we are looking into the new technologies, excluding hydro, we'll find that Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Emirates, and Algeria, Tunisia are leading the region, in fact, right now. But next, please. But we need to look into the per capita share, in fact, to give a better perception on how people are benefiting from this technology, from the renewable energy technologies in general. And we can see that, in fact, Jordan is leading on the per capita share of renewable electricity, followed by United Arab Emirates, and then Morocco, and Mauritania, Tunisia, and then Egypt, and so on. So this highlights that the share of renewables is really higher in this country if we look into the specific per capita share. Next, please. So what are the policies adopted to attract private investments and to promote renewable energy in general? In fact, most of the countries now are adopting competitive bids, competitive tendering process, and auctions. At least 12 countries in the region now are adopting this. And the direct proposal submission is practiced in 3 countries, while feed-in tariff has been adopted in 2 countries, Egypt and Algeria. However, all the feed-in tariff programs are being stopped because of several reasons that we can talk about later. And then net metering is becoming a mainstream, allowing for corporate sourcing of renewable, allowing for residential and commercial sectors to adopt renewable energy solutions, and industrial sector also to adopt renewable energy solutions. So we can see that we have policies for utility scale projects and small scale projects. Next, please. And these are the countries adopting policies, and we can see here that several policies can coexist together on the same time. Next, please. Also, for decentralized small-scale projects, we can see to a less extent that countries adopting small-scale projects. And for example, Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia, Morocco, Palestine, Bahrain, Jordan, Lebanon, and so on. And all these are linked to financial facilities and support given. And I believe you have read in the concept paper about the excellent project that is carried out in Sudan. Next, please. Also, we have dedicated institution, sustainable energy institutions, and we have with us today, for example, Nureya, represented by Engineer Abis Ismail, and we can see this all over the region. And this is really one of the important issues if we would like to see a continuation of the efforts in the country. Next, please. Also, there are several sustainable energy funds available, for example, in the region. For example, the Transition Fund in Tunisia, the Nureya Fund and JEF funds in Lebanon, JEF and IE funds in Egypt, and others, of course, Solar PV Fund in Sudan, and so on. Jarif, of course, in Jordan, one of the most successful. The Revolving Fund for Renewable Energy in Palestine. We have seen many funds now operational, and in fact, attracting the attention of the clients and also of the suppliers to these new markets. Next, please. And from the utility perspective, we are seeing now 5 utilities in the region among the top 100 green utilities worldwide. And these are in Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Egypt, and Algeria. And we hope, of course, in the future to see more utilities investing in renewable energy. Next, please. So what we are seeing that there are sizable project calls in different countries like Morocco, Jordan, Egypt, even lately Kuwait, which has been suspended because of the COVID issue, Lebanon also, and Tunisia. We are seeing also that we have very competitive electricity prices in countries like Saudi Arabia, like Emirates, Morocco, and Egypt. And this is mostly because of the excellent, of course, resources available, but this is backed by concessional finance and other policy measures to reduce the risks that we talked about and encourage investment. And in fact, I'd like to draw your attention to the boxes that you can see to the right of the slide, that the prices are not typically including the network upgrade needed, the permitting costs, the environmental compliance costs, and so on. Several factors are not in the announced, I would say, price. So when we hear price, below 2% or around 1%, as we have been hearing lately, even in Portugal, 1.3 cents, euro cents for kilowatt hour. We need to consider what is offered. Do we have flexible terms of finance? We have grid connection, for example, borne by the country, and so on. So these are issues that to consider. We are seeing also, as I explained earlier, decentralized solutions in Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and Tunisia. And for Yemen, in fact, the only way that Yemen survived, or the Yemeni people are surviving throughout the crisis they are facing, the war crisis, is BV decentralized solutions covering several sectors. And as we are at RECRE have been engaged for 5 years now in designing programs and implementing them for the Yemeni people, and we are very proud of that. Next, please. So another important issue that we can see several international funding and financing institutions active in the region, World Bank, IFC, KfW, FDB, EBRD, and so on. And we can see state-backed private sector companies. And this is the governments would like to act as private sector and to get into partnerships. And we can see the clear example of this is in Morocco, the Mazen company and the SIE company. And also in Algeria, they established SKTM, and lately in Libya, they announced a new company to support through the agency, the Riol, and of course, Masdar in Emirates. Also, we can see that there is a trend that petroleum and oil and gas companies are moving to become energy companies. And 10 countries have somehow directed their national companies to work in the field to invest in the field of renewable energy. This includes Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, several countries, in fact, as you can see the list in this slide. Next, please. And also, there is now some sort of a consensus among the banking sector on the importance, the Arab banking sector, on the importance of adopting sustainable energy solutions and supporting them. And there was a decision that was taken in July 2018 by the Union of the Arab Banks to, in fact, set all the regulations and facilitate, in fact, allowing private sector investments, concessional funds, and so on through the Arab banks. And we are seeing also Lebanon and Morocco issued green bonds, although this has been, as Dr. Abdel Shafi highlighted, this has been stopped by the crisis in Lebanon. Nevertheless, they issued already green bonds, and also in Egypt, personally, I'm one of the committee that is working in developing green bond for Egypt. And in Emirates, we have seen green sukuk that was launched lately. So there is, I would say, a new paradigm that we are acting with in the banks. And if we go to the next slide, you can see it is important to engage the local banks. And there are several success stories in the region, including, and the pioneer was in fact Tunisia through the Brussels Electric program. I urge you to read about this very important success story for the decentralized solutions, mainly solar and solar water heaters, solar PV and solar water heaters. But the key takeaways from this are the importance of having some sort of technical support to the banks and the clients to understand the renewable energy solutions, and then to have web-based tools for easier access to the technology, and also for easier financial tracks, for example, faster track for approved technologies, instead of going to a very lengthy process of getting the loan. So this is one of the issues that we are seeing in the region. Next, please. Also, we are seeing climate finance is one of the most important, I would say, trends in the region, and there are plenty of funds supporting MENA, and you can see here a list on that. However, we can see that few countries are really benefiting from this. You can see Morocco and Egypt are getting around 50% of the climate finance up to 2018. We are hoping that in the near future, the climate finance would, the access to climate finance would be improved in other countries, and also increase in Morocco and Egypt, of course. Next, please. For the targets, this is a sign of that we have a bright future for renewable energy. We have more than 190,000 announced gigawatts of announced targets by 2035. And this would represent somehow 30% of the global solar and wind growth over the coming 15 years. So this is a huge market. Although it is mostly focusing on utility scale projects, but we are seeing some actions toward going also to decentralized solutions, and this would increase the target further. Next, please. The key concern that we should have, and all the financial, and I would say also from the public side and from the private investment side and the financial sector, all actors in fact should work on that there is a big gap between the target and the current reality. And we can see this, for example, in many countries, they have few gigawatts, less than 10 gigawatts, but they are targeting 50 gigawatts or 30 gigawatts or 20 gigawatts. And I don't want to spot on one particular country here, but we can see the distance to target is still, I would say, wide. And this means that there are investment opportunity, but this means also that we need to, in fact, have more conducive environment for business. Next, please. The conclusion that we are seeing a clear pan-Arab commitment to embrace strong forward-thinking policies and to capture the values of renewable energy, but the government need to think more about attracting private investment rather than working with public money. And in fact, the market response from the sustainable energy business side is very positive, and there is a market confidence in many of the countries. Nevertheless, we need to act more, especially in the fragile and in conflict context. Thank you very much. I'd like to conclude with one slide. The best way to predict our future is to create it. Thank you very much, and I now give the floor to Mahela, if you would like to.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Majed. I would actually now like to hand over the floor to Rajiv Mahajan. But before this, as we are starting to run significantly behind of time, if I may ask Rajiv and also Dr. Ihab to wrap up the presentations within 10 minutes. And unfortunately, I need to announce that we won't be having time for the Q&A session. So for all the participants that have questions to ask, please do share them through the questions box, and we will get back to you after the session. So with this being said, the floor is all yours, Rajiv. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I hope I am audible.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I guess Dr. Majed covered quite in detail about renewables and the journey that the region is seeing towards renewables. Incidentally, I had the pleasure of being involved in Egypt's journey towards renewables with one of our first interventions in the region, where we, along with EBRD, came in to finance the Benban project. A bit about the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is one of the world's largest climate funds with nearly $20 billion of capitalization as we speak today. We have financed over 100 projects across the world, with a few in your region, as you rightly pointed out, Dr. Majed, six interventions in the region. Principal among them is Egypt, which I guess the panelists after me will talk about in greater detail. We do have a distinct focus on financing and kickstarting, let's say, a spurt of investments in the climate space from the private sector, and that's the role that we are here to play. Now, what did our intervention in Egypt teach us? Egypt came about because the government was very conscious about what it wanted to do, had a clear investment plan, had a clear investment framework where the risks were clearly thought about, allocated well, and that enabled the private sector to come in and invest with some amount of, let's say, facilitation that we provided by means of, let's say, a long tenor debt and concessional finance. Egypt went off very well. And we are seeing the results right now. The projects are off the ground. Some of them are generating energy, which to us is a great pleasure because they're generating climate impacts as we speak, and that's good for us. But soon after we did Egypt, we replicated the success story of Egypt in a couple of other countries, which include Kazakhstan, which include Zambia, with the African Development Bank. We did something similar in South Africa with the South African bank called DBSA. And we realized that renewables are here, they will stay, but there is quite a lot of commercial interest in renewables. but there are other sectors which may need some amount of, let's say, push, some amount of prodding to get investments moving. And one of the ways we thought was, let's say, renewables would be tackling the supply side. How about looking at the demand side? So what about, let's say, addressing issues relating to energy consumption, resource consumption in sectors that are large consumers of electricity or large consumers of energy, and that would include the industrial sector. I had the pleasure of visiting your region in 2016 and 2017, and we figured out that while the governments are very conscious about energy, as Dr. Margit just pointed out, most of the countries in the region have policies that are well tailored to meeting the demands of developers, but then the demand side is somewhat getting ignored. And the reason for that is also simple. Countries have a huge unmet demand supply gap in energy, and obviously that's easier to plug. That's what the policymakers would kind of gravitate towards, and that's what they have done quite effectively. Now the whole idea also was that what could we do to stimulate demand? One was, yes, there is a latent need in the market. Can we design a structure which enables investments to happen on the ground that somewhat curtail the demand for energy in the industrial sector? Having said that, as we were seeing more demand come through for the GCF financing in the energy sector, we realized that there is a need also to diversify and to look at themes such as energy efficiency and e-mobility, amongst other themes. And we work with our partners, EBRD, to design this program for energy efficiency in the industrial sector. When I visited the region in 2017, we realized that there are quite a bit of barriers. Number one, these industries have been, let's say, functioning for quite some time now. Some plants may be functioning for 20, 30 years. They're performing well. Everything is going on well. And therefore, there is little incentive for the management in those industries to be transitioning towards, let's say, energy efficient practices. On the other hand, there is also, let's say, little or no incentive or little push from the governments to get these investments going. You know, what we did next was to understand what the sector needs and how could we tailor a financial product that could help them improve their efficiencies. And we came up with this structure, and I'll go through that in a bit of detail. So this basically focuses on, this program that we have focuses on legacy industries in 3 countries which are in your region, amongst other countries in the Balkans, in Central Asia, etc. And the idea over here is to, let's say, help the managements in their decision-making process to decide to embark on a process of energy efficiency so as to bring down the demand for energy that they would need in the future. And the challenge is that some of these processes, some of these interventions would essentially be process disruptive. So for the managements to take that call that, look, we are shutting down this production line, this will be in shutdown mode for, let's say, a year, during which the energy efficient processes will be implemented over here, and then we get it running again. That's a big challenge. Secondly, local financing, local bank financing is hard to be obtained for these kind of interventions, given that most banks in the region, amongst other regions as well, simply look at working capital financing, and investments for new technologies or best-in-class technologies is very limited. It's all upon the initiative of that industry to let's say, make that investment decision. So this program looks at the entire life cycle, right through from decision-making to implementation to let's say, the stage at which the benefits are being reaped. So To begin with, this program provides for some amount of technical assistance where we would be helping those industries undertake energy audits, identify the kind of intervention that would be best suited for them, and then help them identify the kind of technology that would work best in their circumstances, which could be, let's say, cogeneration, trigeneration, waste heat recovery, etc. And this would then in turn help them or demonstrate to them what is the impact on the bottom line that they would get, what is the impact in the profitability that they would get, and help them make that investment decision going forward. So that's the first objective. The second objective is then helping them identify the best-in-class technology that is available. So we would facilitate them to get in that technology. We would finance it. We would finance the implementation of that program. And the financing over here is quite interesting. So we begin with a near commercial rate, and depending on how the project is implemented or the investment is implemented, and as it starts showing the climate impacts, we would bring down our pricing. So it's a result-based concessionality. If you achieve those results, you get the concessionality, and that adds, let's say, to your bottom line. It's a double bottom line impact. Number one, you've improved your efficiency, so you get a improvement in your profitability from the increased resource efficiency. Secondly, you get an additional concessionality. So that's a strong lock-in for the corporates to stay invested in over here. And thirdly, we are also incentivizing those corporates to incorporate energy efficiency or climate sustainability into their management decision making. It should be a part of their corporate governance frameworks, and we are incentivizing them to let's say continue on with that journey going forward. And for that also we have a second element of a concessionality, bringing about the specific benchmarks in corporate governance that would be aligned with the climate imperative, and implementing those will get them an additional concessionality. And this is a program which has just been approved by our board about 2 weeks back. It's going to be rolled out in your region. We hope that industries in your region are going to be taking benefit of it and will be, in a sense, be able to, let's say, embark on a process of, let's say, a process of a low carbon pathway, and would be able to also incorporate a climate corporate governance frameworks into their decision making, which would be really interesting. We hope to be achieving overall emission reductions of 17.2 million tons of CO2 over the lifetime, and this is our first, incidentally, our first intervention in industrial energy efficiency. We hope we would be able to replicate this not only in other countries in your region, but also in other regions. And we do believe, we are convinced that this is the way to go, besides all the interventions in renewables that Dr. Magid talked about. I'd be very happy to take questions either offline or during this conversation, and we look forward to a very successful implementation of this program in your region. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope I was within in time.
It was perfect, and thank you very much for sharing these very valuable insights. I would now like to hand it over to Dr. Ihab with just a note from our side. If you could please go through the presentation over the following 10 to 12 minutes, so that we are still in the time frame for the entire session. Thank you very much, and now handing it over to you, Dr. Ihab.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for your kind invitation for me and on behalf of Dr. Mohammed Al-Khayyat, the Executive Chairman for NAREA, to give this presentation about the Bimban Solar Park. Next, please. First of all, we just took a brief about the power sector in Egypt. Power sector in Egypt is divided to electricity and petroleum. There is and Ministry for Electricity, and there is another Ministry for Petroleum. Next, this is the organization charter for the Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy. The Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy is responsible for the electricity generation, mainly from the thermal power plants. It's affiliated to the Egyptian Electricity Holding Company. It consists of 16 companies, 6 companies for generation and 1 company for transmission, and 9 companies for what's called for distribution energies. This is the organization chart. We have another entities regarding to the nuclear power plants, also, and the hydropower project executive authority and new and renewable energy authority. By the way, the 2 Energy Authority, the law is submitted for the parliament, and we expect it to be the parliament to be the renewable energy in Egypt. The hydro and solar and wind will be under umbrella for one entity, and it will be new and renewable energy authority. Next slide, please. Next, please. Yeah, yes, just a brief for new and renewable energy authority in area was established in 1986 to promote renewable and develop renewable energy in Egypt at that time, and we talk about 34 years up till now. This is the old for our authority. Next, please. This is just a brief about the current situation for the power sector in Egypt. We talk about the installed capacity now 58 gigawatt. Big load we talk about 31 gigawatt. The total installed capacity we talk about 6, maybe 5.8 gigawatt from hydro, solar, and wind. Also, and the electricity access rate we talk about 99.7%. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, this is what is called for the hydro. We talk about 2,800 megawatt from hydro. From wind, we talk about 1,125 megawatt. It's public power plants, wind power plants by Nareya. We own it. Also, we have another first wind farm, private sector, 250 megawatt is under operation now. For the solar, we talk about now 2,000 megawatt, and about 1,500 megawatt is mainly 1,465 megawatt in Bimbani, which we will make a details and brief details about it. And we have another 26 megawatt or 25 megawatt by Nareya, and another 100 megawatt PV for small and medium for net metering scheme, and for this is what is the situation now. Next, please. Egypt now, we target our vision now in Egypt to increase the share for renewable energy in the energy mix. We have 2 strategies. Short-term strategies is 20% by 2022 from the installed capacity, and 42% from the electricity generation by 2035. This is the long-term plan strategy. Our policies depend on 4 schemes: competitive bidding, merchant scheme, IPP, feed-in tariff, and need metering. Next, please. Egypt have enjoy with the high solar radiation, and we have another privilege that all the Egyptian people lives only in 5% from the total land. We talk about 95% is the desert and the empty, so we can implement any PV project or solar project in this land. This is one of our privilege in Egypt for solar energy. Next, please. This is just to give a review for our target for by 2022 for the installed capacity. It depends on fossil fuel 80% and for renewable is 20%. Next, please. For the longest strategy plan, we talk about the thermal power plant will be reduced from 80% in 2022 to 55%. Also for renewable energy will be increased to 42%. Nuclear energy 3%. By the way, this strategy before it was included the coal power plants, but for strategy and according to we need to clean energy and to encourage clean energy, as well as the cost for renewable energy. The government decided to replacement the coal by renewable energy project and updated this is strategy to be all of them depend on most of them depend on renewable energy. Next, please. By the way, for the land in Egypt, most of the land is owned by the government. It's a stated land, and the government decided to allocate this land for NAREA, for the New and Renewable Energy Authority. After that, to avail it to the private sector. Why to avail it after to private sector? NAREA conducted all the technical studies for the wind measurements, for the technical topographic study, for cleaning this land, and to be ready to avail it for the private sector. Also, by the way, to allocate a land in Egypt, it take minimum 2 years for obtain the approval from all entities in here in Egypt. Also for the cost of for this land. So the government decided to allocate it for NAREA, and NAREA can avail it according to regulation adopted or approved from the cabinet regarding to avail the land for the private sector. And we took here about more than 7,600 square kilometers have been allocated NAREA for renewable energy project in Egypt. Next, please. Back for the solar Bimban solar park. Back just we talk about 6 years ago in 2014. The installed capacity at that time 32 gigawatt, and the peak load to about we talk about 28 gigawatt. But the installed capacity, most 91% from them is conventional power plant, and not at that time it's suffered from the shortage from for natural gas and the petroleum for supply for this thermal power plant. Also the spare parts and some of them out of the surfaces. So we talk about blackout every day in Egypt. All the people suffered at the time from the blackout. According to that, next please. In 2014, the government decided to face this problem, these challenges by take a new decision. The first one, electricity tariff was fully subsidized. In this year, the government decided to make tariff reform to phase out the subsidy for the electricity during 5 years. It was planned to be finalized in 2019, but according to some social impacts and the Egyptian devaluation against the US dollar and the currency, the foreign currency, decided to extend it up to 2022. Also at that time, the government decided to encourage the private sector by the feed-in tariff, because the feed-in tariff, it's very attractive to put it on tariff to attract the private sector to come in in fast way. Next, please.
Dr. Ihab, I'm so sorry to interfere until we put on the next slide. Just as we are running behind time very significantly, if we could please ask you to focus a little bit the presentation and wrap it up in a couple of minutes discussing about Benban Solar Park and the key factors that led to its successful implementation.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. The feed-in tariff was planned or addressed to establish 2,000 megawatt PV, also 2,000 megawatt wind, and 300 megawatt PV just for only for a small PV project. Next, please. For the tariff at that time, the last one is about $14 for the project more than from 20 megawatt until 50 megawatt. According to that, we received about 200 proposal or 200 request from the foreign investors to participate in the feed-in tariff project. And next, please. But when we go to make the agreement for the power purchase agreement, there was a dispute about the arbitration because the lenders at that time decide to the arbitration must be out of Egypt, but according to the document offered from the government, the arbitration must be in Egypt locally. So just only 3 companies approved to participate in the first round and accepted to the arbitration to be in Egypt, and the others investors refused to participate in this first round. According to that, the government decided to go to make a middle solution and to accept to the arbitration to be out of Egypt offshore, but also at that time that the tariff to be reduced from $14.3 to be $8.4 because the tariff is reduced, and also for the minimum or the year is to 25 years. The international arbitration to be out offshore, to be out of Egypt, and the target capacity 2,000 megawatt. The second tariff also only for the investors already qualified for the first round, not open for anyone comes from the, just only for the investors for the first round. Next, please. NAREA and the stakeholders in the electricity sector decided to avail a land allocated to NAREA in Benban. In Benban site, it's allocated in south of Egypt in Aswan Governorate, and it's in consists of total area 37 square kilometers. By the way, you know that the avail land is responsibility for the investors, but to save the time and the cost, NAREA divided this land for the Stampa project, and after that avail it for the land. Next, please. Okay, no, back please. Okay, the land is 37 square kilometers. We talk about 32 individual plan, 32 projects. Just only 2 projects from the first round and 30 projects from the second round. We talk about the total installed capacity 1,465 megawatt. We talk about more than $2 billion, the total investment cost in this area, in this project. 70% comes from foreign direct investment from outside of Egypt, and that is, we talk about also 18,000 indirect jobs for this project, and it was or considered the largest solar power installation in the world. By the way, also in Bimban, the cost sharing agreement between all the developers was assigned with the Egyptian Electricity Transmission Company to establish 4 substations to evacuate all the electricity generation from the project to this substation, and the investors pay the total cost for the Egyptian Electricity Transmission Company for that. Next, please. This is just overview for the project award in 2018. Next, please. If we talk about the solar park in Bimban, not only we talk about the electricity generation, we talk about the environment. The environment, it's safe about more than the electricity generation from the clean energy. We talk about how to encourage the learning and the poverty in that area. The secondary school for solar energy was established in Bimban in the same area to encourage the people or the student to plan and to study in this and to serve this is park in Bimban. Next, please. Here, this is we talk about 18 indirect direct jobs already worked in Bimban, and we talk about job opportunities and the revenue and how to face the poverty in this area. From most of the people comes from the surrounding area about Bimban in this area. Next, please. For Bimban, Egypt more benefits from Bimban. After Bimban completed, and after that, the first BOO tender document we received tariff. We talk about for the solar. We talk about 2.48 cents from 14 cent dollar in the first round and 8.4 from the second round. Why we received this, or we achieved for this tariff? Because it reflects the confidentiality from the lenders. If we talk about the IFC, the EBRD, the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, all the lenders worked in this project in Bimban, make the confidentiality for the investment environment in Egypt and the confidentiality for the Egypt for that. So it reflects from the received for the offer and received from the solar power plants, and we expect to reduce this tariff in next project to be around 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Already, thank you for the feed-in tariff project to give us the opportunity to reduce the cost and encourage the private sector to come to Egypt and to invest in Egypt for the solar power plants. Next, please. It's the last slide. Egypt, we talk about large scale for Egypt project is one of the main elements to attract foreign direct investment. Thank you for the feed-in tariff scheme, which creates a renewable energy market in Egypt and attracts the developers and international lenders. And thank you for solar park, Bimban Solar Park, and it will still a strong signal that Egypt able to attract the investment, the direct investment, especially for the solar energy. And thank you for listening, and sorry for maybe take a longer time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ihab, and thank you to everyone for participating with these contributions. I just want to remind everyone that all these case studies, along with a few other ones from the region, are going to further enrich the white paper, which will be made publicly available in a few weeks' time. And now I would also like to turn our attention to the last part of today's session, which is going to consist of a panel discussion through which we will now delve even further and try to understand the financial mechanisms and instruments which are required to accelerate the green agenda in this region. So leading this conversation, we will have Ahmed Samir Erberbali, who is the Interim Managing Director of the MENA Clean Energy Business Council. And if we can also have the slide up with the panel discussion would be fantastic. Joining him on the panel, we will have Marta Simonetti, who is a director at Global Fields Limited. Alongside them, we will also welcome Mercedes Vela Monserrate, who is the Associate Director of International Affairs at ADGM, Financial Services Regulatory Authority. We will also be joined by Sujala Pant, who is serving as the Chief Technical Advisor and Project Manager at UNDP for the Regional SDG Climate Facility Project. And last but not least, we will welcome Rory McCarthy, the Chief Commercial Officer of Yellow Door Energy. So a warm welcome to everyone and leaving this in your good hands, Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Mahela, and thanks for everyone who are joining us today. We'll try to be very quick, just to not take much of your time. I think we are already behind time. Thanks for our esteemed panelists on this panel. This panel, we will be mainly discussing a very important and interesting topic. We'll discuss the innovation and deployment of climate finance in this ARP region and how to improve the effectiveness of climate finance in the region. We'll also discuss how to tailor the different financial instruments to adapt with this region and the role of financial centers. We have ADGM Mercedes with us today in accelerating climate finance in this region. One last point, we'll try to also have some case studies from Marta and Rory about successful implementation of different case studies in the region. So what could be learned from these on regional and local level as well. Without further ado, we'll do a bit shift, Marta, sorry for that, and the order. We'll start with Mercedes. Mercedes will mainly talk to us about the role of financial centers and how financial centers can play a very central and important role in enabling and accelerating sustainable finance in this region. So over to you, Mercedes.
Great, thank you very much, Ahmed. So I work for ADGM, Abu Dhabi's International Financial Center, where I'm spearheading the work on sustainable finance. Now, as an international financial center, but also from a regulatory perspective, we've been looking to establish a robust and innovative hub that will efficiently channel investments into the different verticals of sustainability. A number of frameworks have already been established nationally and internationally, and also through different industry bodies. The UAE and the region have also demonstrated its commitment to sustainability through a number of different initiatives, such as the UAE 2021, but also the Green Agenda. We, as a financial center, and very much in line with the UAE vision, we've decided to come up with our own strategy to very much scale up sustainable finance in the region, not only within Abu Dhabi, the UAE, but also across the entire region. Now, as you can see from the slide, we are looking at 4 different pillars. The first pillar is very much about regulation. So we see as fundamental for policymakers to set up the framework and the environment in which financial institutions can operate so that we can connect finance with projects. As a result, and in order to promote further clarity within the market participants, we published, together with the 10 UAE financial regulators and exchanges in the UAE, the first set of UAE guiding principles on sustainable finance, looking at taxonomy, disclosure requirements, and also governance. Now, clearly these guiding principles are voluntary in nature, but they do take into account international best practices. As a next step, we are looking to issue a survey to all of our different entities to better understand the level of implementation of those guiding principles, with a view to issue in the short to medium term some more concrete policy or regulation in relation to disclosure and taxonomy, very much in line with what the European Commission is doing, or China or their jurisdictions. Right, so once we've looked at the regulation side, we are also looking at cooperating with national and international stakeholders. As has been already discussed today, there is a huge amount of work when it comes to promoting sustainable finance. But what we've seen and the feedback that we have received from our different stakeholders is that most of these initiatives are very much ad hoc and uncoordinated. So as a financial center, we want to serve as a platform, a vehicle to amplify all this great work, but in a coordinated way. So what we did in Abu Dhabi, we launched the Abu Dhabi Sustainable Finance Declaration that has now been signed by 36 private, public, national and international organizations that have committed to work with ADGM in order to promote best practices and very much looking into bringing finance with projects to promote and scale up sustainability in the region. Right, so once we've got the framework in place and the clarity around the requirements, we've looked at the collaboration. We also think that is of critical importance to raise awareness and talent. Trillions will be needed, it was discussed before as well, for the funding of the SDGs, but also all the commitments under the Paris Agreement. So greater understanding of the importance of sustainable finance is crucial in order to mobilize all of these efforts. As a result, at the beginning of 2019, we launched the Abu Dhabi Sustainable Finance Forum as part of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. The forum was the very first event in Abu Dhabi that focuses on advancing the adoption of sustainable finance. Now, we are not only looking just at raising awareness, but we are also looking at raising talent. We also believe that this is critical. We need to build expertise to create a more sustainable future. So, also at the beginning of this year, our sister company, ADGM Academy, announced the launch of the first certificate of sustainable finance in the region in partnership with the London Institute of Banking and Finance. Right, so then let me just recap what we've covered so far. One of the key requirements is clarity in terms of regulation, disclosure, taxonomies, and governance. We also need to promote further collaboration between national and international stakeholders, private and public sector. And we also need to raise awareness and knowledge. But the most important thing that we see as an international financial center is the creation of a financial ecosystem. We want to see greater volumes of transactions happening in the region. So as ADGM, what we are doing is to work with a diversity of institutions, product offerings and services to support this capital formation to boost the availability of financing to achieve the sustainability goals and the UAE sustainability agenda. And again, very briefly, I know that we are running out of time. Just to give you a few examples, we facilitated the UAE first Green Sustainable Real Estate Investment Trust, the REIT by Master, and we also play a key role in the GCC first Social Impact Bond. This is it's a financial tool that raises private investment to support high impact social programs. And then finally, also looking at our demand-driven approach, we, together with the Department of Energy and Abu Dhabi's Security Exchange, we announced the Green Bond Accelerator Program that very much looks at establishing or creating Abu Dhabi as a new regional hub for the issuance of green bonds, but also green sukuks. So just to sum up, I think we are very pleased to be facilitating efforts towards the progression of the UAE sustainability agenda. We are looking at this through the regulatory lens, through innovation, but also through collaboration. and very much aligning what we do to meet international best practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. That's very interesting, and so much happening in Abu Dhabi with ADGM. We are actually happy as CEBC to be one of the signatories for the Abu Dhabi Sustainable Financing Guidelines. I encourage everyone on the call, if you haven't checked that out, to check it. Just write on Google Abu Dhabi Sustainable Finance Guidelines. It's quite ambitious. I think we have Eurodo. I think Eurodo is also part of EDGM, so CEBC is also part of EDGM, so it's quite consistent.
Yeah, big family, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Mercedes. So now we move to Marta. So just a quick introduction. Marta will give a short presentation about some real case studies internationally and some lessons that could be learned from that for our region. So that would give you a very good international overview about what's happening worldwide and how this region could learn from that. So without further ado, I'll leave it to Marta. You can introduce yourself and start your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope everyone can hear me well. And we can go straight to the next slide. I'm going to be talking about some of the elements about innovative finance and the structuring of climate finance. Ahmed, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. And perfect. And taking a little bit the perspective from my own personal work in global fields where we advise a large number of companies in the private and public sector on structuring green finance and climate finance. And one of the typical questions in the structuring is indeed, like what is traditional, what is innovative, and whether we are really deploying the most appropriate and relevant instrument according to the type of project that we have. So this is, like a question that I would like to discuss a little bit during the presentation. But also I wanted to give a little bit of a different perspective, which is the role of global fields as an investor. I mean, we do small work by all means, but that's one of the perspective that I wanted to bring about how we can also touch the small and medium-sized enterprises, invest in the small scale renewable and clean energy generation, support some of those companies, and really make the case of investing in green, the business case of green, and answer the question of what is that needs to be done, what ought to be done, regardless of the cost. So if we move on to the next slide. So here, we have a long conversation about traditional and innovative finance. When we talk about traditional finance, and by all means, this is very context specific, we talk about the use of, grants, as well as concessional equity, concessional finance, concessional debt, result-based payments, reimbursable grants, which are then given back to the donor, for example, or to the investor upon receiving certain thresholds, and in some cases, some elements of guarantee funds and insurance packages. Now, I will, in a moment, spend a little bit more time talking about what is more innovative in the space of climate finance. What I wanted to stress is that here, when we talk about innovation in climate finance, we are really referring that conversation to developing countries, countries in conflict or post-conflict, or transition countries, early transition countries, for example, so that we really put that innovation and the concept of innovation within its regulatory and enabling context as well. Where I see the transactions being very successful, and this is something that I will stress throughout this presentation, is when we look at that transaction from a holistic viewpoint, integrating different type of instruments, and each one of those being there to tackle a specific barrier or a specific risk that exists. Let us move on to the next slide. So if we see the next slide, all right. Excuse me, the slide before, I could not see that you have moved so quick. Perfect. So, here, I'm taking a little bit of a deeper overview of the innovative instrument. Now, when I talk about making sure that we have the best instrument for the best risk or to tackle the relevant barrier, you will see that each one of those instruments can be quite specific to achieve a certain outcome. And some of these instruments, by all means, have been used for tackling traditional investment barriers. But when I think about climate investment barriers, this is something that in some cases and in some contexts, it is still a little bit to come. So some of the new instruments that are coming to the fore, and we've seen a good development in many countries, is the concept of open banking and crowdfunding. And from there, even the expansion to an element of enabling customers, for example, retail, to give an earmarking to make sure that their own money achieve a certain impact. Now, when we look and when we transfer this back to the investment side, okay, how can they help, creating more capital, for example, for clean energy generation or specific projects? We see that in some cases when we get the impact banks involved, if I look, like many examples here in Europe, then we create substantial platforms, substantial in terms of size, to be able to offer both technical and financial support to small companies. And similar to this is the green deposits question. Then we move on to guarantees and insurance. Guarantees and insurance have been used previously, of course. They're not totally innovative in themselves, but they are becoming an instrument that's been more and more under discussion within climate finance. Within the climate finance, with a narrow definition of being the finance provided by multilateral and bilateral donors. So, here we see that often we have the traditional way of supporting projects, for example, transactions, technical assistance, debt, but sometimes there is still something else that needs to happen either before or during the implementation of those projects. And this is really the tackling of the enabling environment, the environment for the investments and the regulatory system. So each country may have a different situations, but this cannot happen, after a project is taking place. So guarantees and insurance can really manage to create a way in which we can either mitigate or transfer a risk. So typically they're structured in different ways. A guarantee can be a financial guarantee, and insurance a product or output guarantee, so to speak. But now they've become extremely important, and the conversation going within the issues of climate finance and the development of investments within climate change mitigation and adaptation. Something quite new, which is something interesting to explore. Not many countries have it. Is very popular here in the United Kingdom. Is the contract for difference. It is a little bit a concept of trading, but what this tackles is the fluctuations in energy prices and in energy output as well. So that the contract for difference create an incentive for companies, for renewable energy generation companies, to basically provide them with some protection against output fluctuations and the subsequent price fluctuations as well. And on the other side, it protects customers as well. So next slide. Here we move on to tackling kind of different aspects, not just the large scale, but also the small scale. And the small scale also, when we refer it back to, okay, what do we do, for example, with individual customers, individual buildings and houses? I wanted to bring an example which can be extrapolated to represent an example or a model in some cases for the region we are discussing today. So this is one of the work that I'm conducting at the moment, which is a multi-instrument and multi-country program in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And where here, like we have something of importance is that we are really using multiple instruments to be able to tackle different aspects of the work. So from the policy dialogue with the government to making sure that the incentives are competent or pertinent rather, and useful for the project, so that we can then support the investment that is going to follow the technical assistance. And if we can go further down, the next slide. The second aspect of the presentation that I wanted to give an overview a little bit is in answer to some of the questions that we tend to be asked on a regular basis, which is, about what do we do, like if the business case isn't very obvious. Well, like here we have a growing evidence of the importance and the impact that investing in green has, whether it is now, whether it is in the short term, or whether it is in the longer term. And there are many elements that we take into consideration and we get customers to think about as well, which is the operational cost savings, which can be quite immediate as well. But also the fact that if we invest in either small scale or large scale production, clean energy production, it's not just the energy in itself, it is what that does to the community and to a series of spin-off activities and economic activities. So we have electricity, for example, therefore we can have a shop, we can recharge our mobile phones, etc., etc. And we've seen this around the globe, and this is more and more the case also in the Arab countries. The supply chains are maturing, in particular in respect of PVC, for example, and costs are lowering. And this is quite important because then it allows us to tackle considerations and our reporting on what we can do in terms of transition risk and physical risk. Ultimately, the future cost will be minimized. And the other questions, even if we were to park for one side the business case that there is, the other question is, what is that we really want to do? What ought to be done for us, for today, and for the future generations as well, which I think is a question that we need to continue asking ourselves. And next slide. So this is, I wanted to bring an example from our crowdfunding investments that we do. Here is an investment I'm participating in, what the company Global Fields in Ghana. It's not so much the country that I'm focusing here, it is the structure. And this is a small scale investment, and you have some of the data to the center and right of this slide. Of course, it isn't, like in comparison to the biggest investment, to the biggest solar plant in Abu Dhabi or in the Emirates. However, it's something which is important and it's small scale enough to support small and medium-sized enterprises. And we are gathering a whole set of investments via investment platforms like this Ecoligo investment, which is the facilitator in this case. What is also important here is that we are creating integration between ESG, so the environmental, social, and governance reporting, and even before reporting, what is that we gather, what is so important for us to consider, and SDGs. I don't have it here because we want to kind of, of course, stay within time, but I do have a lot of spin-off work, for example, from here, putting the SDGs and the ESG together to see, how synergies can be created. And the great thing here is that we are bringing the value of the value chain back in the countries rather than exporting it into Europe, for example. One last thing which is important, those are those small projects which are significant, important, but not big enough for an MDBs, for example, to pick up. And my very last slide, which is the next, just to give a little bit of a summary and what we can extrapolate for the region, for contexts in transition, in early development, for example, is very much, and this is something that I hold as very, very important in my work and in my advice to clients, is the role of holistic and integrated approaches, so that we build the enabling environment, the institutions, the governance, all the safety infrastructure, as well as and alongside the building of the green infrastructure or solutions that we are given. And this is all the more important in the current situation in this COVID or post-COVID. I put post in bracket because I wasn't quite sure where we are at, and we may be in all different situations and time across the world, is the concept of green recovery and then green jobs. And also important and something to remember, to value equally small scale and large scale. There are different barriers and risks to tackle, but they can be tackled. They can be solved, and also to consider a nature-based solution. It hasn't been part of these presentations, but we are seeing a widening and also more importance being given to avoiding as much as it is possible the building, the physical building with concrete and wood and materials, but to use nature as an option as well. Seeking alignment between various reporting frameworks that exist, so that we can perhaps find, on the one hand, a minimum denominator that we can always use. But for organizations and companies seeking to be sponsored, for example, or seeking external support from banks or investors, to be able to already have quite a lot there, because it does exist. And this can be accompanied by building policy statement and a strategy. So this is all for me. Please let me know if you have questions, and there you go. You have my email address here, LinkedIn website as well. And yeah, that's all.
Thanks, Marta. Thanks so much, Marta. Very informative presentation. I have a lot to comment on it, but due to the limited time, I think I will go to the next presentation, and I politely ask Sujala to be a bit strict on time. So if you can limit it to 5 minutes, that would be perfect.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. I'll try. I'm delighted to be part of this panel today. Thank you for the previous speakers. I will focus my contribution on an emerging offer that we have in the region, that we are delivering under the framework of a regional initiative called the SDG Climate Facility, Climate Action for Human Security. Next, please. And this is the project that I'm currently managing, but we're doing this in partnership with a number of agencies that you can see in the bottom there. It brings together the League of Arab States, a very important political actor for us, the Arab Water Council, which brings in the regional sort of know-how on issues of water scarcity, displacement, related food security issues, and a number of other leading UN agencies such as WFP, UNDRR, UN Habitat, UNEP Finance Initiative, and of course UNDP. And what this shows you is that we are each sort of bringing in a comparative advantage, things that we are each good at towards a common objective. And the objective of this project, which is important to set the context of what I'm about to talk about, is that it aims to address the intersectionality between climate change, SDGs, and security. And what we mean by security, from the perspective of the partners, is the reference to human security, in the sense of how do the effects of climate change impact on the security of the person. And this is very closely linked to the achievement of the SDGs. And in the context of the Arab states, this is very much linked to fragile context, which is really one of the focus areas of the project. What the project is trying to do is to support regional and national actors to be better able to integrate climate considerations and risks into their planning, whether it's forecasting, taking anticipatory action, enabling resilient planning, and of course financing. And the ability to do that well is expected to not only contribute to meeting the SDGs, but also contribute to crisis prevention and recovery, given that we're talking about a lot of unexpected shocks, both natural disasters, but also things that humans are responsible for. And secondly, the project aims to put in place a mechanism to increase the finance available to support the operationalization of this integrated approach. And that's where I would like to focus the remainder of my presentation. Next, please. This is where the idea of the facility comes in. This is a work in progress that together with our partners we're working towards in defining much more. But it is envisioned as a center of excellence for the Arab states region to address the SDGs climate security agenda in an integrated manner. It aims to become a platform where research, knowledge, evidence are driving the kind of considerations for the operationalization of the integrated concept into some tangible results on the ground to address these three agendas that I mentioned. And for all of these, partnerships are going to be a core requirement, both in terms of practical and technical know-how, but of course in terms of financing these ideas that are coming out. And so if I could describe the facility in one word, it's about matchmaking. It's matchmaking project ideas with those who have an interest in investing in those ideas. And these will be done through what we're calling, for the time being, a climate investment forum, which will be a part of what this facility offers. We know that grant financing is useful and that it has enabled a lot of change, but it's simply not enough to reach the ambitions that Agenda 2030 sort of puts in front of us, which is a climate resilient, low carbon world. But there is hope with private finance. A study by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission estimates that achieving the SDGs could open up to $12 trillion of opportunities in food and agriculture, cities, energy infrastructure, all of which contribute to this idea of human security. Next, please. So what will we do? What will this facility actually do? What does this investment forum look like? As I mentioned, it's a matchmaking vehicle for those who bring project ideas. And convening, really sort of different actors from different sectors who may not usually talk to each other is perhaps one of the strengths that UN agencies bring to the table, and not to mention political fora like the League of Arab States, which really provide us with the political legitimacy to take on some of these actions. And so, by one of the aims is to catalyze private and alternative capital for concrete investments. There are many projects that are taking place on a pilot scale, on a very small scale, with which we have a proof of concept, but additional financing at a much larger scale would really enable us to move towards that transformative level of change that we are looking for. And so the business model of the facility will be set up in such a way that different financial instruments, as Marta has just alluded to, and as Mercedes alluded to earlier as well, that we can work with these different instruments available to us to maximize impact. And depending on the preferences of actors, whether it's for a particular type of project or geographic location, we will mobilize finance towards that common objective. And supporting that, what we bring in is a technical assistance mechanism to support market entry, transaction preparation, and market development, for which we do have actually quite a bit of experience. We can also help de-risk investments by supporting countries to access public climate finance, whether it's domestic or international, which can really be an important leverage to boost investor confidence. And to support the necessary regulatory reforms that are required in emerging markets, and again, particularly so in fragile contexts, which is the aim of this facility. So we believe we have the ingredients, we have the vision, which we're still sort of concretizing, and these kinds of discussions that are taking place today are really, we hope, will generate the kind of interest that will lead us to some concrete partnerships to take this idea forward and do so in a non-traditional way if you will. So I'm going to end it there, Ahmed, and happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sujala. Very interesting project, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the impact of this project in the region. I'm sure it's there's a lot of stakeholders that will need to be involved. I think it's super interesting. Thanks again. So we'll have our last but not least presentation by Mr. Rory McTherry from Eurodor Energy, a company that I really have a lot of respect for, and I think it's one of the most successful case studies in the region that could be studied, and there's a lot of lessons that could be learned from Eurodor. So over to you, Mr. Rory, and I think we'll skip the questions. So this will be the last presentation to end our webinar. And if anyone have any questions already asked, we'll try to answer them offline and send you the answers after the webinar. Thanks again. Over to you, Rory.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and very humbled by that introduction, and we appreciate the opportunity to join the panel and very interesting speakers, which we've greatly enjoyed, and the information and the gains from this, I think, are beneficial to all. So I'd like to thank CEBC and UNDP for having Eurodor Energy on this webinar. And I guess in my first slide here, you can see introducing exactly who we are. We're founded initially in 2015 in the UAE and Jordan, and we provide commercial and industrial solutions to the private sector primarily for solar energy and energy efficiency. So we design, we build, we engineer, and we finance solar energy and energy efficiency solutions for customers. This was initially developed when the Shams initiative was introduced by the government in the UAE, which enabled net metering. And it was interesting listening to Dr. Ebhab Amin a little bit earlier about what was happening in Egypt and some of the regulations there. And I'll talk a little bit about how developing regulation affects climate financing, certainly in the private sector as we move forward. So essentially over the last 5 years, we have developed 110 megawatts worth of business across the commercial and industrial space. We're present in the UAE, Jordan, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. And you're absolutely correct, Ahmed, we're an ADGM company and proud to be so, registered in Abu Dhabi. So we like to call ourselves a sustainable energy partner, and we are very, very committed to that as part of what we do. The next slide, please. Next slide, please, Ahmed. Thank you. Thank you very much. So our investors are institutional investors. You'll be familiar with IFC Corporation and Mitsui Japan and Equinor. So we have some strong financial investors, and key really to this business is having a strong amount of capital. The way that we approach business and investment is a mix of debt and equity. And I've used two simple examples in the interest of time, and I realize I'm the last speaker. So I picked one of interest here, which I think is great. It's called Carrefour, and this actually talks about an area of land. What you see before you here was actually 3 mountains. That's correct. 3 mountains, which we flattened in the middle of the desert. Jordan has been very, very forward thinking in its development of climate change initiatives and climate financing, and creating an environment that enables the private sector to leap forward. What we're actually doing here with Carrefour is we've built this plant of 17 megawatts in the desert, and it's generating 29,000 megawatt hours per annum. It has a 15% reduction in energy costs, improving business competitors, and we're actually shipping this and transporting it using the transmission lines already developed in Jordan across to 8 different locations for Carrefour. So we've done a number of these in Jordan, and policies called wheeling. It's available in Jordan. It's not available yet in Saudi Arabia and other countries in the GCC, but we're very proud and very pleased and humbled that the GCC is making such inroads in terms of development of its climate change initiatives and looking at the removal of subsidies in the future to develop private investment moving forward. Next slide, please. The second slide I've got is Al Nabuda, which is locally developed here in the UAE, which is 3.1 megawatts. Now, previously we had a ground-mounted example of solar energy, and this is your typical roof-mounted example of solar energy, where it's 3.1 megawatts, approximately 11,000 panels, deleting 2,000 tons of carbon emissions per year. And again, also a combination of finance and equity. So these are the types of projects that we engage. But some of the key things and what we see is really a big part of what we do in the future is innovation, and I'll touch on that in a little while. Next slide, thank you. The key part of what I see as a challenge moving forward is climate change, accelerating climate finance and making that work. And this is really where I think government support comes into play. And I refer earlier to Dr. Ihab Amin, who was talking earlier about Egypt and Ben Ban and the regulation. We were investing and considering quite substantially moving forward in Egypt. And Egypt, for example, had quite a progressive policy in terms of removing subsidies and the cost of power, and quite progressive. Net metering was in place, but earlier this year, a reduction in that tariff and a fixing of that tariff for the next 3 to 4 years. It's an example of where that will actually slow climate financing initiatives down, because it will keep the cost of power low. Now, there's often an argument that takes place that, well, that's better for business, that it encourages companies to locate and encourage companies to invest in Egypt, and absolutely it does. But there's other ways you can do that rather than subsidize power. When you subsidize power, there's other things you can do. There's rent incentives, there's tax incentives, there's customs duties reductions. In the GCC, for example, we've seen over the past 20 years, approximately 120 billion spent on energy subsidies. This was a report I read this week by Strategy Middle East, and the UAE cumulative figure stands between 7 to 10 billion of that. And you've got Emirates, where different Emirates have different charges and tariffs of power, so that affects the ability to finance and affects the ability to save money for customers. So if you take a private customer like the two I just used examples of Nabuda and Carrefour, what's critical to them is being competitive. What's critical to them is making sure that they can control their overhead costs. Energy in say Carrefour and Nabuda or other large companies in the UAE can be as much as 10 to 15%. If you're able to reduce and help them reduce that energy cost by providing an element that's independent, you bring their overheads down, you make them more profitable, you reduce the carbon footprint, plus you also, distributed solar has the advantage of actually helping governments make sure they can plan for the investment of transmission lines in the future without huge investment needed straight away. And very interesting, the paper that you sent out earlier that I read, that it talked about the fact that power consumption in the Middle East region, especially in the GCC, is doubling every 10 years. Whenever you build a power plant for $100 million, you need to spend, let's say, 50 to 75 million in transmission to complement that. So distributed solar, particularly in the private sector, I believe can really be an asset to governments and to countries moving forward with climate financing initiatives. So I think that's an important piece. The other thing that, of course, that really will help climate financing initiatives move forward is stable regulation. So I've talked about two key things, which I see as key. One is stable regulation of policy, be it net metering, be it self-consumption, be it looking at the type of connected load and the impact on the grid that connected load is going to have if you're generating private power. And then, of course, being consistent with it. We noticed in Jordan earlier this year, when businesses went under a lockdown, as many countries did, there was an immediate shutdown of solar plants. That has an impact on banks and financial institutions when they see that, because it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, because they think, oh, is this a stable type of asset that I can fund over a long-term period? And that's one of the things that we want to sort of control and work with governments, because we don't want to create a negative perception and investing in renewable energy projects. So when we look at, so those things are key. And the other thing as well, in terms of climate financing, you can finance kilowatt hours, you can finance cubic meters of water, you can finance steam, you can finance a number of things, as long as the regulations, the subsidies, and the commitment is there to be able to do that. Banks are certainly willing to listen, and other finance houses are willing to listen. The other aspect, of course, is innovation. Power is a big thing, and generating power is a big part of what we do, but also looking at things on a strategic basis of how can we actually save customers money? How can we look at heat recovery rather than wasting heat? How can you look at food rather than just disposing of food? These are also things that impact climate. These are also things that impact waste. And these are things that we can do better, and these are things that we can provide technology that's available for, and companies don't necessarily have to use their own capital to do this. Companies like Yellow Door and other companies as well can have the tools, have the ability to provide the right financing solutions to make these work. So that's really what I would say is key. And that can also be done in an off-grid scenario as well. You can look at off-grid scenarios that can integrate with batteries. You can look at off-grid scenarios that can integrate with diesel backups. You can look at a number of different things to provide sustainability leading through the private sector, because I believe that the private sector really has to lead, but it can only do so with strong regulation, fiscal policy to be able to support it to move forward. Those are really the main points I wanted to make this afternoon, but I would welcome any questions, and I do hope I stuck to time.
Thank you very much, Rory. Very interesting as usual and as expected as well. A lot of lessons learned. I think we don't have time for questions, but I'd like to thank all the panelists. I think Mercedes, she had to leave for another urgent meeting she had to go for. But again, thanks for everyone who joined us today for this panel and for the whole webinar. I just on the discussion paper that Rory mentioned, that's something we showed before the webinar, but if you haven't seen it before, you can check it out on the handout section on your right hand of the screen. You can download it and read it after the webinar. We'll also be developing this further in collaboration with the UNDP team, and it will be shared within the coming month with everyone. So please stay tuned. It will have some case studies as well, so it would be very interesting white paper to look at. So I'll give it now finally to Mihaela to conclude this webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and thank you to all of our distinguished speakers as well as to our participants for sticking with us until the very end of this session. I think that there are many lessons that we've learned going through the case studies and through the discussions today, and if I were just to summarize maybe a couple of them, on one side, we really need to emphasize the need for partnerships amongst all the economy actors, so coming from private sector, governments, and also the households themselves too, in order to accelerate progress towards the SDGs agenda, towards the Paris Agreement, and when it comes to renewables deployment as well. I think that also when it comes to financial instruments, we need to look at new ways in which we can deploy climate finance. Just a few examples would be green bonds, blended finance, crowdfunding, and debt equity. And not to mention to create that strong business case of taking action by demonstrating the commercial viability of the renewable projects and also the knock-on impacts on the economy and the society as a whole. So again, a reminder that the white paper will be made publicly available within a month's time, and I would really like to recommend everyone again to connect to the team at the Clean Energy Business Council and also UNDP's SDG Climate Facility project by getting in touch with Ahmed and Sujala. So with this being said, thank you once again, everyone, and wishing everyone a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ahmed, can you end the webinar?